So the premise is, and I suspect many people already know this, that thousands and thousands of years before Lord of the Rings, stuff happened. Who would have thought? And much of this has been written about by Tolkien in Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales. So there's and some of it in the I remember rightly, in some of the appendices to the Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
So a whole load of back canon for it, and they decided to finally begin to get their arms around it and try to capture some of the backstory. So it doesn't start right at the beginning of Tolkien's work, because that would arguably be slightly difficult to film. What it addresses that begins the point where the original evil Morgoth was destroyed some years ago, and Galadriel had been a warrior fighting against him, and she believes that there are still remnants of his forces out there, including Sauron, who was known to be one of his chief, I'd say, henchmen.
Generals.
Generals. I like henchmen. Um,
Acolyte is good as well.
Acolyte is a better one. So we begin that with the position from Galadriel. At the same time, you have an area that called the Southlands, which is, if you ever have looked at a map of Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth, you might have an idea what it's going to end up being.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I think Holly, you have two shows and you've been watching two shows which come with their own geography lesson. So
the geography is wildly complicated. The premise is, though, fundamentally that bad stuff is happening in the south. A place that had been very closely aligned with Morgoth previously, and the men there had fought for Morgoth. You have Galadriel, who believes that Sauron is still a threat. You have the elves, the main group of elves, who believe that everything's fine now and we should stop worrying about things. And you have the dwarves, who are happily doing dwarfy things and mining, because that's what, as we know, dwarves do.
Yeah, that's what dwarves do, yeah.
You also have a group called the Harfoots, who are a precursor to the Hobbits, who also have, if I remember rightly, quite large feet, as being a very hobbity thing.
Yeah.
And they are pottering along on their little travels, which they do. They migrate all around Middle Earth. And at the beginning, you have, as becomes apparent over the first two episodes, a man crashes from the heavens, who is a very tall man who doesn't know how to speak. I can't pick a language.
Yeah.
Found by the Harfoots. And you have Galadriel, who has been heading out to sea to return to the old land of the elves, and realizes that she shouldn't do this, so finds herself shipwrecked, or well, in the middle of the ocean, being saved, and in a place called Numenor, where which is where Aragorn's ancestors were originally from. So, and you have these independent bits coming together with where is Sauron? He must be here somewhere. You have uprisings in the south with orcs. And how is this all going to come together to the point where anybody knows what's going on at all?
All right.
So, you had a question there.
So obviously we had Galadriel, previously played by Cate Blanchett, now played by Morfydd Clark. So yes. This is obviously young Galadriel, and from what I could understand, this is Galadriel on a quest, or Galadriel's quest.
Yes. So
8 episodes of Galadriel's quest.
Broadly speaking, yes. Her brother had died. She's, a lot of this is about personal vengeance and various things which come out along the way. You also have young Elrond, who is also on a different sort of personal quest to rebuild his relationship with his old dwarf friend Durin the.
Oh yeah, Durin. That's the one that all the hobbits were singing about.
One of the many Durins. There's a younger Durin.
Okay.
And then there's Durin, who comes up in Lord of the Rings, who may or may not be either of those Durins, might be a completely different one. I think is a different one.
Okay. I know in Lord of the Rings they keep going on about Isildur's heir,
Yeah,
and so is this going back to the time of Isildur?
it is indeed. So we have
Okay.
Isildur in here, who is played by a bloke whose name I don't remember. His father is one of the key characters, who is a general from Numenor, and is therefore all part of this coming together of elves and men to battle against, evil that is rising. And you spend the sort of one of the key focuses is trying to figure out what's going on and who anybody is, because you know that Sauron is out there somewhere, but you don't know who Sauron is, and you've got a few reasonable contenders there, some of which are more logical than others.
Does it go a bit Agatha Christie?
It is a little Agatha Christie, yeah. And there's and in the same time as it could it be the very tall stranger who's hanging out with the Harfoots? And if it's not him, who is he? So there's a lot of this unfolding against beautiful, beautiful scenery. I mean, the cinematography is wonderful. It's a beautiful thing to watch, regardless of your views on the contents and its pace. It's visually stunning.
Well, you would hope so, because this was reportedly the most expensive TV show ever made.
Fortune, yes. Yeah, and the production values do pay off in just how beautiful it looks. It sort of slightly knocks your socks off how stunning it is and how they're able to capture things. It's a real joy if you love Lord of the Rings and you love, which is not consistent to everybody who has watched it, but if you're in the geography and what places are and what places were, and seeing how it all fits together.
So you obviously love Lord of the Rings.
I love Lord of the Rings.
You love Lord of the Rings. So I have two questions for you. Number one,
I've read the book many times as well, I should add.
All right, cool. So number one question is, how does this hold up against the films? Is this like a stain on the good name of the films? I mean, and by that I'm talking about the Lord of the Rings films, not the Hobbit films, because those are a stain. So I'm talking about, how does it hold up against the Lord of the Rings films, and how did you get on with it? How much did you like it? Two questions.
Okay, I think actually it holds up reasonably in comparison to the films. It's slower. This is a common bit of feedback from people, is it's much slower, and that's been a bit of a quite negative feedback from people. Is just like nothing happens. I enjoyed the pace, actually.
Okay.
I liked it, and I think it's a bit Marmite. I mean, Sean did not like it. I'm just tracking down what he had to say about it. It was.
Oh, so Sean, who is currently sunning himself somewhere in Thailand, or probably asleep somewhere in Thailand right now. He actually sent you his detail.
Yes, so Rings of Power, disgustingly awful. Lucky to rate 2 stars. IMHO. So he wasn't a fan. No. It's not the best thing I've ever seen, but I really, really enjoyed watching it, and I would go back to watch the previous episode again before watching the next one.
All right.
Which I often do with series as well, because I like being sort of back in the moment, and you pick up things that you'd missed in the previous one. Sometimes you have to rewatch all of that. I mean, Lovecraft Country.
Lovecraft Country, yeah.
I had to rewatch the entirety of that before every new episode. The only way to figure out what was going on. So I think it's probably a 3 from me. I really liked it. In some ways, I would give it a 5 because I enjoyed it enormously. But I think on balance, I appreciate the criticisms that others have given. So no, probably more like a 3.5 actually, if I'm allowed a half today.
No, go ahead. We can do whatever we want.
3.5, because I could give it a 5, but I think that would be me just being self-indulgent.
And we never do that.
I did watch the first episode of it, but then I wasn't into it enough to watch it all, so I didn't carry on with it. And my oldest brother is a has been a Tolkien fan since his youth, and he's now in his 50s, and he utterly despised it. So every time he came into the house, I was challenged, have I watched it? And it was like, no. And it was like, don't watch it. And so he has gone and rewatched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and he's made sure his children have been watching them so that they're not polluted by any influences of anything
I've done
else.
exactly the same. So I've rewatched the trilogy and I've rewatched all of the Hobbit films.
Okay, I can feel a tangent coming on. I can feel a tangent rant going on about the Hobbit movies and how.
Okay, go for it.
No. But this is a TV series that I don't think I'm ever going to watch because I think part of the, even though I am not like, because I remember being at a friend's wedding, and this is a friend. Let me put it this way: he had bits in his wedding program written in Elvish. To give you an idea.
I know this friend.
No, you do not. You do not know this friend. You do not know this friend. He had bits written in Elvish, and he was challenging us to try and figure out what this thing said in Elvish. It was a threefold chord is not easily broken written in Elvish, and yeah. And he spent some time when we started talking about, because it's around about when and he was complaining about they strayed from the original texts, and I was like,
where's Tom Bombadil?
Yeah, that kind of. And I was kind of like, wasn't the original text just a glossary or like an index? How do you film an index? Of course they're going to stray from the original text. But I feel like the fact that this TV show exists is first and foremost because of money. Because somebody is trying to make a whole bunch of money. That is the first and foremost reason why this exists. And I can't get away from that. So I don't think I'm a big enough Lord of the Rings head to go, oh, I must have everything. No, I'm like, okay, it exists. Cool. Some people like it, fine. Some people don't like it. Some people are going to get really het up about it. Doesn't really change my life. I don't think I'm going to watch it. There's too much stuff on TV and there's too much stuff in my life to spend 8 hours trying to figure out who Sauron is when I already know who Sauron... Well, I already know what Sauron becomes. I mean, I also have problems with prequels. I have serious problems with prequels, which is also why I might never watch House of the Dragon. But rant over. And that wasn't even the proper rant that I was going to go on.
Breathe.
And breathe. And go back to